At a bachelorette party meant to celebrate love, the bride-to-be revealed her true selfish and destructive nature in front of everyone, shattering the wedding plans and exposing years of hidden manipulation. I'm still processing what happened that night. My best friend Sarah completely lost it and said things that can't be taken back. She humiliated her own sister, made racist comments about the bartender, and basically destroyed every relationship she had in one evening. The worst part was watching everyone's faces as they realized who Sarah really was underneath all the wedding planning excitement. Her fiancé called off the engagement 2 days later when he heard what happened. I keep thinking about how none of us saw this coming, but maybe the signs were always there and we just ignored them. So I'm Alex, 29, office worker. I've been friends with Sarah since college, about 8 years now. She was always the type who liked being the center of attention, but I figured that was just her personality. She worked in marketing at some tech startup and always had these elaborate stories about her coworkers and clients. When Sarah got engaged to Mike last year, I was genuinely happy for her. Mike seemed like a solid guy. He was an accountant, pretty quiet, but they balanced each other out. Sarah asked me to be her maid of honor, which I was excited about even though I knew it would be a lot of work. The wedding planning process was intense. Sarah had very specific ideas about everything and got stressed when things didn't go exactly as planned. She changed the venue twice, went through 3 different caterers, and had multiple meltdowns about the flower arrangements. I chalked it up to normal bride stress and tried to be supportive. Her younger sister Emma was also in the wedding party. Emma was 26 and worked as a teacher. She was always more laid back than Sarah, but she seemed happy to help with wedding stuff. Sarah sometimes made comments about Emma not contributing enough or not understanding her vision, but I didn't think much of it at the time. The bachelorette party was supposed to be the fun part after months of stressful planning. We had reservations at this trendy rooftop bar downtown, and I'd coordinated with the other bridesmaids to make sure everything would be perfect. I really thought it would be a great night to celebrate Sarah before her big day. The night started at my apartment around 6 p.m. on a Friday. I had spent the afternoon getting ready and making sure I had all the decorations and party favors organized. Sarah arrived first, looking amazing in this tight black dress she'd bought specifically for the occasion. She seemed excited and was already talking about how this was going to be the best night ever. Emma showed up about 15 minutes later with 2 of Sarah's work friends, Jessica and Amanda. The other bridesmaids, Sarah's cousin Lisa and our college friend Rachel, arrived shortly after. Everyone was in a good mood, and we took a bunch of photos in my living room with the decorations I'd set up. Sarah immediately started directing the photo session, telling everyone where to stand and how to pose. She wanted specific shots for her Instagram story and kept retaking them until they were perfect. I noticed Emma looked a little tired, but she was smiling and going along with everything. We had planned to do a little pre-gaming at my place before heading to the rooftop bar. I had bought champagne and made some appetizers. Sarah was already pretty animated and kept talking about how much she deserved this night after all the wedding stress. She mentioned that Mike had been annoying her lately by questioning some of their expenses, but she said tonight was about forgetting all that drama. Jessica brought up how excited she was to meet Mike's groomsmen at the wedding, and Sarah made this weird face. She said something about how Mike's friends were kind of boring and how she hoped they wouldn't bring down the energy at the reception. It struck me as an odd thing to say about your future husband's closest friends, but everyone just laughed it off. Emma was being quieter than usual, so I asked if she was feeling okay. She said she was just tired from work and hadn't been sleeping well. Sarah immediately jumped in and said Emma had been stressed about her maid of honor speech, which was news to me since Emma wasn't the maid of honor. I was. Emma looked confused and corrected her, but Sarah just waved it off and said she meant bridesmaid speech. The conversation moved on to discussing our plans for the evening. Sarah had looked up the rooftop bar online and was excited about their cocktail menu. She kept talking about how she wanted to try everything and how this was her last night of freedom. The way she said it made it sound like she was going to prison instead of getting married, but I figured she was just being dramatic. Around 7:30, we decided to head out. Sarah insisted on taking more photos outside my building, and then we called 2 Ubers to get to the bar. Sarah, Emma, and I rode together while the others took the second car. During the ride, Sarah was scrolling through social media and making comments about other people's bachelorette party posts. She seemed competitive about making sure hers looked better than everyone else's. The rooftop bar was exactly as advertised, trendy, crowded, and with an amazing view of the city skyline. We had a reservation for 8 people at a high-top table near the edge of the rooftop. The hostess led us over, and we got settled in, with Sarah taking the seat that had the best view for photos. The atmosphere was perfect for a bachelorette party. The lighting was dim but flattering. There was good music playing, and the other patrons seemed to be having fun without being too rowdy. Our server, Marcus, came over to introduce himself and explain their cocktail specials. He was friendly and professional, probably in his mid-20s, and clearly experienced at handling groups like ours. Sarah immediately started flirting with Marcus in what I thought was just playful bachelorette party behavior. She was asking him about his favorite drinks and making jokes about how she needed something strong to calm her pre-wedding nerves. Marcus was polite and played along while taking our drink orders. I ordered a cosmopolitan, Emma got a glass of wine, and most of the other girls ordered various cocktails. Sarah decided she wanted to try 3 different drinks throughout the night and asked Marcus to surprise her with his recommendations. She was being loud and animated, which was attracting attention from other tables, but everyone seemed to be enjoying her energy. The first round of drinks arrived quickly, and we made a toast to Sarah and her upcoming marriage. Sarah gave a little speech about how grateful she was to have us all there and how much our friendship meant to her. It was sweet and seemed genuine, and I was feeling good about how the night was going. We spent the next hour drinking, taking photos, and catching up. Sarah's work friends were telling funny stories about their office drama, and Rachel was updating us on her recent dating disasters. Emma was participating more as she relaxed with some wine, and the conversation was flowing naturally. Sarah kept flagging down Marcus every time he passed our table, even when we didn't need anything. She would ask him questions about the bar, the other customers, and his personal life. At first it seemed like harmless flirting, but it was becoming more persistent. Marcus remained professional, but I could tell he was getting a little uncomfortable with the attention. Around 9 p.m., Sarah announced that she wanted to move to the bar area to get better access to Marcus and to be closer to the action. The bar was more crowded and we had to stand, but Sarah seemed energized by the change of scenery. She immediately positioned herself right at the bar and started trying to get Marcus's attention again. Emma suggested we should probably eat something since we'd been drinking for a while, and Sarah snapped that she wasn't hungry and didn't want to waste time on food. Her tone was sharper than necessary, and Emma looked hurt. I tried to smooth things over by saying we could order some appetizers for the table, but Sarah said she didn't want to spend money on overpriced bar food. The dynamic was starting to shift slightly, but I told myself it was just the alcohol and the excitement of the night. Sarah had always been a little self-centered, but she was the bride and this was her night, so I figured we should just go with the flow. By 10 p.m., Sarah was definitely drunk. She'd had 3 strong cocktails and was getting louder and more demanding. She kept trying to get Marcus to take shots with her, which he politely declined since he was working. When he explained the bar's policy about employees not drinking with customers, Sarah got annoyed and said he was being uptight. Emma had been trying to keep an eye on Sarah and suggested maybe we should slow down on the drinks and get some water. Sarah turned on her and said Emma was being a buzzkill just like she always was. The comment was harsh enough that our whole group went quiet for a moment. Emma looked shocked and hurt, but she didn't respond. I tried to redirect the conversation by suggesting we play some of the bachelorette party games I'd brought. We found a slightly quieter corner of the bar, and I pulled out a trivia game about Sarah that I'd put together. The questions were meant to be fun and lighthearted, covering things like her favorite movies, her biggest fears, and funny stories from college. At first, Sarah was into it and enjoyed being the center of attention. She was laughing at the questions and adding her own commentary to the answers. But when we got to a question about her most embarrassing moment, she suddenly got defensive. The answer was supposed to be about the time she'd fallen into a fountain during our junior year spring break, but she insisted that wasn't embarrassing and demanded I skip the question. Rachel tried to lighten the mood by sharing her own embarrassing story, but Sarah interrupted her and said she didn't want to hear about other people's problems tonight. The comment was rude and completely unnecessary, and I could see Rachel's face fall. Sarah seemed oblivious to how she was affecting everyone else. Jessica suggested we take a group photo to post on social media, and Sarah immediately perked up. She spent 10 minutes arranging everyone and directing the poses, then made us retake the photo multiple times because she didn't like how she looked in the first few attempts. She was being really demanding about it, telling people to move or change their expressions, and I could see the other girls getting frustrated. When Marcus walked by our area, Sarah grabbed his arm and asked him to take photos of just her with the city skyline in the background. She was being really touchy and standing way too close to him while posing. Marcus looked uncomfortable but was trying to remain professional. Sarah kept asking for more photos and different angles, completely ignoring the fact that he had other customers to serve. Emma finally spoke up and said maybe we should let Marcus get back to work. Sarah whipped around and told Emma to mind her own business. She said Emma had been negative all night and was ruining the fun. Emma looked like she was about to cry, but she held it together and just stepped back from the group. I was starting to get really concerned about Sarah's behavior. This wasn't just drunk bride antics. She was being genuinely mean to people who cared about her. I tried to pull her aside to talk to her privately, but she shrugged me off and said I was overreacting. She insisted she was just having fun and everyone else needed to relax. The tension in our group was becoming obvious to other people at the bar, and I was getting embarrassed about the scene we were creating. Around 10:30, things took a serious turn for the worse. Sarah had been getting increasingly frustrated with Marcus for not giving her the attention she wanted. When he brought drinks to another table instead of immediately responding to her waving at him, she lost it completely. She marched over to where he was serving the other customers and loudly demanded to know why he was ignoring her. Marcus politely explained that he was helping other guests and would be with her in a moment, but Sarah wasn't having it. She started raising her voice and saying he was providing terrible service. The other customers at the table looked uncomfortable and Marcus was clearly embarrassed. He apologized to them and tried to guide Sarah back toward our area, but she planted herself right there and continued her rant. She was saying he was unprofessional and that she was going to complain to the manager. I rushed over to try to calm her down and get her away from the situation. I apologized to Marcus and the other customers and tried to explain that she was just excited about her bachelorette party. Sarah turned on me and said I was taking his side over hers, which made no sense since I was clearly trying to help her. Emma also came over to try to defuse the situation. She gently suggested that maybe Sarah had had enough to drink and we should think about heading home soon. Sarah's response was absolutely shocking. She told Emma to shut up and said she was sick of her little sister always trying to control her and ruin her fun. But then Sarah said something that made everyone within earshot stop and stare. She told Emma that she had always been jealous of her, and that's why she was trying to sabotage her bachelorette party. She said Emma had never been able to handle the fact that Sarah was prettier, more successful, and had found someone who actually wanted to marry her. Emma's face went completely white. She looked like Sarah had physically slapped her. The cruelty of the comment was breathtaking, especially coming from someone who was supposed to love and protect her little sister. Emma just stood there for a moment, then quietly said she was going to go home. Sarah wasn't done though. As Emma started to walk away, Sarah called after her and said maybe it was better if Emma left since she'd been bringing down the energy all night anyway. She said Emma had always been the boring one in the family, and she didn't know why she'd even included her in the wedding party. The rest of our group was standing there in complete shock. Jessica and Amanda looked horrified. Rachel was shaking her head in disbelief, and Lisa looked like she wanted to disappear. Marcus had backed away from the situation but was clearly shaken by what he'd witnessed. I ran after Emma to try to stop her from leaving. She was already at the elevator with tears streaming down her face. I told her that Sarah was just drunk and didn't mean what she'd said, but Emma shook her head. She said this wasn't about alcohol. Sarah had been making little cutting comments to her for months during wedding planning, and tonight had just confirmed what she'd suspected about how Sarah really felt about her. Emma said she was done trying to be the supportive sister to someone who clearly resented her existence. She told me she was going home and that she needed some time to think about whether she even wanted to be in the wedding anymore. Then the elevator doors closed and she was gone. I went back upstairs to find Sarah holding court at the bar, seemingly unbothered by the fact that she'd just devastated her own sister. She was telling Marcus and anyone else who would listen that Emma had always been dramatic and couldn't handle a little sisterly teasing. She was completely rewriting what had just happened, acting like Emma had overreacted to some harmless jokes. The other girls in our group were clearly uncomfortable. Jessica and Amanda were whispering to each other and kept glancing toward the exit. Rachel was nursing her drink and looking like she wanted to be anywhere else. Lisa was on her phone, probably texting other family members about what had happened. I tried to talk to Sarah about what she'd said to Emma, but she brushed me off. She said Emma needed to learn to take a joke and that she wasn't going to let her sister's sensitivity ruin her bachelorette party. The complete lack of remorse was disturbing. This was her little sister she'd just humiliated in public, and Sarah was acting like Emma was the problem. Marcus had clearly had enough of Sarah's behavior. When she tried to order another drink, he politely suggested that maybe she should slow down for the evening. Sarah immediately got defensive and accused him of discriminating against her. She said he was cutting her off because he didn't like her personality, not because she was drunk. The accusation was completely unfair, and I could see Marcus was getting frustrated. He explained that the bar had a responsibility to serve alcohol responsibly, and that he was just looking out for her well-being. Sarah laughed and said he was probably just mad that she hadn't tipped him enough yet. Then Sarah said something that made my blood run cold. She looked Marcus up and down and made a comment about how he was probably used to getting better tips from customers who found him attractive. The implication was clear and completely inappropriate. Marcus is black, and Sarah's comment had definite racial undertones that made everyone around us uncomfortable. Marcus handled it with more grace than Sarah deserved. He simply said he was going to get his manager to help resolve the situation. Sarah immediately started backtracking, saying she didn't mean anything by her comment and that people were being too sensitive. But the damage was done. Everyone had heard what she'd said and understood exactly what she'd meant. Jessica finally spoke up and said she thought we should probably call it a night. Amanda agreed and said she had an early morning anyway. It was clear they just wanted to get away from Sarah and the toxic atmosphere she'd created. Rachel said she would share an Uber with them, and Lisa said she was going to drive herself home. Within 15 minutes, our party of 8 had dwindled down to just Sarah and me. Sarah seemed genuinely confused about why everyone was leaving early. She kept saying the night was still young and that everyone was being boring. She couldn't understand that her behavior had driven away every single person who had come to celebrate with her. I realized I was faced with a choice. I could stay and try to babysit Sarah for the rest of the evening, or I could cut my losses and go home too. Part of me felt obligated to stay since I was the maid of honor, but another part of me was disgusted by what I'd witnessed and didn't want to enable her behavior any further. I decided to try one more time to get through to Sarah before making my decision about staying or leaving. I suggested we sit down somewhere quieter where we could talk privately. Sarah reluctantly agreed, probably because she realized she was running out of people to hang out with. We found a small table in a corner that had just opened up. I ordered us both waters and tried to have a serious conversation about what had happened. I told Sarah that her behavior toward Emma had been really hurtful and that she owed her sister an apology. I also mentioned that her comments to Marcus had been inappropriate and potentially offensive. Sarah's response was to get defensive and turn the situation around on everyone else. She said Emma had been jealous and negative all evening and had deserved to be called out. She insisted that her comment to Marcus had been misunderstood and that people were being too politically correct. She couldn't or wouldn't acknowledge that she had done anything wrong. I tried a different approach and asked her if she was happy with how the evening had gone. Did she really feel good about the fact that her sister had left in tears and her friends had all gone home early? Sarah said she was disappointed that everyone had been so sensitive, but she insisted that she'd had fun and that's what mattered. The selfishness of that statement was staggering. This was supposed to be a celebration with the people she cared about most, but she was perfectly fine with having hurt and alienated all of them as long as she'd enjoyed herself. I was starting to see a side of Sarah that I'd never fully recognized before. I asked her what she thought Mike would say if he heard about what had happened tonight. Sarah immediately got angry and said I'd better not tell him anything because it would just upset him unnecessarily. She said what happened at the Bachelorette party should stay at the Bachelorette party, and that Mike wouldn't understand the context anyway. The fact that she was already trying to cover up her behavior and manipulate me into keeping secrets was another red flag. I told her I wasn't comfortable lying to Mike if he asked me directly about how the evening went. Sarah said I was being dramatic and that there was nothing to lie about because she hadn't done anything wrong. At that point, I realized there was no getting through to her. Sarah was so wrapped up in her own perspective that she couldn't see how her actions affected other people. She was either unwilling or unable to take responsibility for the pain she'd caused, and that was deeply concerning. I told Sarah that I thought we should call it a night, and that she should probably go home and get some sleep. She protested and said she wanted to go to another bar or club, but I wasn't about to enable more bad behavior. I offered to help her get an Uber, but she said she could handle it herself. As I was getting ready to leave, Sarah made one last comment that really stuck with me. She said she hoped everyone would get over their drama by the wedding because she didn't want any negativity on her special day. Even after everything that had happened, she was still only thinking about herself and how other people's hurt feelings might inconvenience her. I said goodbye and left her at the bar. As I walked away, I saw her trying to strike up a conversation with a group of strangers at the next table. Even after driving away everyone who actually cared about her, she was still seeking attention from anyone who would give it to her. The next morning, I woke up with a terrible feeling in my stomach that had nothing to do with alcohol. I kept replaying the events of the previous night and feeling worse about what I'd witnessed. I checked my phone and saw several texts from the other bridesmaids, all expressing shock and concern about Sarah's behavior. Jessica had texted that she couldn't believe what Sarah had said to Emma and that she was questioning whether she wanted to be in the wedding. Amanda had sent a similar message saying she was really uncomfortable with the racist undertones of Sarah's comment to Marcus. Rachel had texted that she'd never seen Sarah act like that before and was wondering if we'd all missed some warning signs. The most concerning message was from Lisa, Sarah's cousin. She said that Emma had called her crying when she got home and that Emma was seriously considering dropping out of the wedding. Lisa also mentioned that she was planning to tell her parents, Sarah's aunt and uncle, about what had happened because she felt they needed to know how Sarah had treated Emma. I realized I needed to reach out to Emma directly to check on her and see if there was anything I could do to help. I called her around 10 a.m. and she answered on the first ring. She sounded tired and upset, but she was willing to talk about what had happened. Emma told me that Sarah's behavior the night before had been the final straw in a pattern of treatment that had been building for months. She said that during wedding planning, Sarah had consistently dismissed her ideas, criticized her contributions, and made subtle digs about her appearance, her job, and her relationship status. Emma explained that she'd been trying to be patient and supportive because she knew wedding planning was stressful, but the things Sarah had said at the bar had crossed a line. She said it was clear that Sarah had been harboring resentment and jealousy for a long time, and Emma didn't want to be around someone who could be so cruel to her own family. I asked Emma if she'd heard from Sarah at all since the night before. Emma said Sarah had sent her a text around midnight that just said with no acknowledgement of what had happened or any kind of apology. Emma said the casual tone of the message had actually made her feel worse because it showed that Sarah didn't think she'd done anything wrong. Emma told me she was planning to drop out of the wedding. She said she couldn't stand up there and celebrate Sarah's marriage when Sarah had made it clear how little she respected her. Emma also said she was worried about what kind of sister-in-law Sarah would be to Mike and whether their relationship would survive once he saw her true colors. I tried to convince Emma to give Sarah a chance to apologize and make things right, but Emma said she was done giving Sarah chances. She pointed out that Sarah was 31 years old and should know better than to treat people the way she had. Emma said she needed to protect her own mental health and self-respect, even if it meant missing her sister's wedding. After we hung up, I sat in my apartment feeling completely overwhelmed. I was supposed to be the maid of honor, but I was starting to question whether I wanted to support a marriage for someone who had shown such an ugly side of herself. I also wasn't sure how I was going to face Sarah again or what I would say to her about the previous night. Around noon, my phone rang and it was Sarah. She sounded chipper and energetic, like nothing had happened the night before. She started by thanking me for organizing such a fun bachelorette party and saying she'd had an amazing time. The disconnect between her perception and reality was jarring. I asked Sarah if she remembered what had happened with Emma, and there was a pause before she responded. Sarah said that Emma had gotten upset over nothing and that she'd probably overreacted because she'd been drinking. Sarah claimed she didn't remember exactly what she'd said, but she was sure it wasn't as bad as everyone was making it out to be. The fact that Sarah was minimizing and deflecting responsibility made me realize that Emma was right to be done with her. I told Sarah that what she'd said to Emma had been really hurtful and that Emma was considering dropping out of the wedding. Sarah's response was to get annoyed and say that Emma was being dramatic and trying to make the wedding about herself. I also brought up Sarah's comment to Marcus and how inappropriate it had been. Sarah immediately got defensive and said I was reading too much into an innocent comment. She insisted that she wasn't racist and that people were being too sensitive about everything. She couldn't understand why everyone was making such a big deal about what she considered harmless remarks. Sarah then asked me not to tell Mike about any of the from the night before. She said he was already stressed about wedding expenses and didn't need to deal with additional problems. She framed it like she was protecting Mike. but it was clear she was trying to protect herself from the consequences of her actions. I told Sarah that I wasn't comfortable keeping secrets from Mike, especially since her behavior had been so concerning. Sarah got angry and said I was supposed to be her friend and maid of honor, which meant I should be on her side. She accused me of turning against her just like everyone else had. The conversation was going nowhere, and I could feel Sarah trying to manipulate me into being complicit in covering up her behavior. I told her I needed some time to think about everything that had happened and that we should probably talk again in a few days when we'd both had time to process. Sarah didn't like that answer. She said she needed to know that I was still going to be her maid of honor and that I wasn't going to her by telling Mike about the bachelorette party. The way she phrased it made it clear that she knew her behavior had been wrong, even if she wasn't willing to admit it. I told Sarah that my role as her maid of honor didn't include lying for her or helping her hide things from her future husband. I said that if she wanted my support, she needed to take responsibility for her actions and make things right with the people she'd hurt. Sarah said I was being unreasonable and that everyone was ganging up on her. The call ended with Sarah hanging up on me in frustration. I realized that our friendship might not survive this situation, but I also realized that might not be such a bad thing. The person I'd seen the night before wasn't someone I wanted to be associated with, and Sarah's refusal to acknowledge her behavior showed that it wasn't just a one-time mistake. By Sunday evening, the situation had completely exploded. Lisa had told her parents about what happened at the bachelorette party, and they had called Sarah's parents to discuss their concerns. Emma had officially dropped out of the wedding and told her parents why, which led to a family confrontation that I heard about through the grapevine. Jessica and Amanda had both texted Sarah to say they were no longer comfortable being bridesmaids after what they'd witnessed. Rachel had called Sarah directly to express her disappointment and had also backed out of the wedding party. Within 48 hours, Sarah had lost 4 of her 5 bridesmaids, leaving only me in an increasingly uncomfortable position. The most significant development came Sunday night when Mike called me. He said he'd been hearing conflicting stories about the bachelorette party and wanted to know what had actually happened. He sounded concerned and confused, and I could tell he was trying to figure out whether the rumors he'd been hearing could possibly be true. I was faced with the decision I'd been dreading. I could either lie to protect Sarah, or I could tell Mike the truth about what I'd witnessed. I thought about Sarah's request to keep everything secret, but I also thought about Mike's right to know who he was marrying and the fact that he'd specifically asked me for the truth. I decided to be honest with Mike. I told him everything that had happened at the bar, Sarah's treatment of Emma, her inappropriate comments to Marcus, and her complete lack of remorse afterward. I tried to be factual and fair, but I didn't sugarcoat the severity of what I'd witnessed. Mike was quiet for a long time after I finished talking. Finally, he said he appreciated my honesty and that some of what I'd told him aligned with concerns he'd been having about Sarah's behavior during wedding planning. He mentioned that Sarah had been increasingly demanding and dismissive of other people's feelings, but he'd attributed it to wedding stress. Mike said he needed to have a serious conversation with Sarah about what had happened and what it meant for their relationship. He thanked me for telling him the truth and said he understood why I'd been put in a difficult position. He also said he didn't blame me for whatever decision I made about continuing as maid of honor. After we hung up, I felt a mixture of relief and sadness. I was glad that Mike knew the truth, but I was also mourning the loss of what I'd thought was a close friendship with Sarah. I realized that the person I'd been friends with for 8 years might not have been who I thought she was, or maybe she'd changed into someone I no longer recognized. The next morning, I got a furious call from Sarah. She'd found out that I'd talked to Mike and was absolutely livid that I'd her. She accused me of ruining her life and said I was a terrible friend who had stabbed her in the back. She said she never wanted to speak to me again and that I was no longer welcome at her wedding. I told Sarah that I was sorry she felt that way, but I couldn't regret telling the truth when directly asked. I said that her behavior at the bachelorette party had been unacceptable and that she needed to take responsibility for the consequences. Sarah hung up on me again, and that was the last conversation we ever had. Epilogue. Mike called off the wedding 2 days later. He told me that his conversation with Sarah had confirmed his worst fears about who she really was underneath the facade. He said she'd shown no remorse for her behavior and had instead tried to blame everyone else for being too sensitive. He realized he couldn't marry someone who was capable of such cruelty toward her own family and others. Emma and I stayed in touch after everything happened. She thanked me for being honest with Mike and said she was relieved that he'd seen Sarah's true colors before it was too late. Emma started therapy to deal with the emotional damage from years of Sarah's subtle manipulation and abuse. She's doing much better now and has set firm boundaries with Sarah. The other bridesmaids and I occasionally check in with each other, and we've all agreed that we missed some major red flags about Sarah's character. We realized that she'd always been somewhat self-centered, but we'd excused it as confidence or wedding stress. The bachelorette party just revealed what had always been there beneath the surface. I haven't spoken to Sarah since that final phone call. I heard through mutual acquaintances that she moved to another city and eventually got engaged to someone else. I hope she's learned from what happened, but I honestly doubt it. People who refuse to take responsibility for their actions rarely change without serious intervention. Looking back, I'm glad I told Mike the truth, even though it cost me a friendship. He deserved to know who he was marrying, and Emma deserved to have someone stand up for her after years of mistreatment. Sometimes being a good friend means protecting people from someone's harmful behavior, even when that someone used to be your friend.